Hey, welcome back to the Postscript. And this week we're going to be taking a short break from recording new episodes as it's just a crazy, crazy season for me and for my ministry. And so I'm actually getting ready for an upcoming missions trip, and I got a lot of teaching on the horizon, conferences and retreats that I'm going to be a part of. And so I wanted to take this moment, this time, to revisit one of my favorite conversations from the archive. And so in this episode 88, which, man, is like 200 episodes ago, we sat down with Pastor Dan Reneau of Living Faith Lee Summit, where we explore the fascinating world of art, creativity, history, and culture. As you may or may not know, Pastor Dan Reneau is also a professor of art, and he teaches art history regularly. And so we sit down to ask some questions like, why is it that human beings create? Well, why are they drawn to creativity? What does our creativity reveal about the God who made us? And how can the church better understand art? We're not always very good at that. And we might understand art not just simply as decoration or entertainment, but as a language that has always shaped civilizations and can still serve as a bridge for the gospel today if we simply take time to understand it, think about it. And so this conversation is especially meaningful to me because you may or may not know that long before ministry became my full-time calling, I was an artist and an art instructor myself. And, sometimes I still think of myself as an artist. I don't know if that's so much true now as it used to be, but I've always loved studying art and art history because it tells the story of humanity's beliefs and values, fears and aspirations. Every artistic movement, from the Renaissance to modernism, from Impressionism to Postmodernism, it's really a window into the worldview of the generation in which that art exists. And so we have so much that we can learn about humanity and what the enemy is doing in our world and what the Lord is doing in our world. So understanding art is in many ways understanding people. And if we're going to reach the world and we're going to reach people with the gospel, it's worth learning how visual language has shaped their cultures and the way that they think. So I hope that you're going to enjoy this conversation as much as I did. I really enjoyed it. I remember it vividly. And so whether you're an artist or a student of history or simply someone who wants to better understand the culture that you're called to reach, I think you're going to find that this episode is insightful and encouraging. So thank you. Thank you as always for listening to the Postscript. Please share, comment. Your engagement with us is always really, really important to us. But with that, we'll be back next week with a brand new episode. But until then, enjoy this conversation with Pastor Dan Reneau. God bless. Dan, welcome back to the show, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
It's good to have you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has.
Why are people drawn to art? Why are people compelled to make art? It's a very broad kind of philosophical question that maybe doesn't have a super clear answer. But from your perspective, why do people want to make art and why do people enjoy art?
From the very beginning, we see that we have God as a creator, right? And so we are prone to mimic that, to follow that. Even historically, you see that the evidences of art making throughout history have been that man desires to create just like our God does. Mm-hmm. And so there's an impulse for us to be creators as well.
Right.
And so I think that's a telling thing. It reminds us as people that, yeah, we were also created by God.
And that we're his image bearers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that we're going to be prone to do things that God does.
Yeah. And I think, artist as creator is one of the evidences of God. Mm-hmm. But yet we have, instead of showing that evidence that yes, God does exist, that we are made in his image, we've turned to a humanistic lens. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, instead of, showing his light, his glory, we've turned from him.
Sure. It makes me think about the compulsion to create in Babylon. Mm-hmm. Right? There was a desire to make something, but it was something that glorified self versus glorified the Lord.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Like, we're about to enter a portion of the conversation today that I think is crucial for people to get an understanding of how history, how secularism, how faith interweave into the arts in the West throughout time. And I want us to give the listener a snapshot of art history in the West over the last 1,500 to 2,000 years, because I think it'll help us to get an understanding of how God's been at work and how Satan's been at work, and how we ought to have a proper perspective. So if you don't mind, I just want to ask, if we were to start with the medieval time period, could we slowly walk through to a contemporary moment in time where people are making? But let's start with medieval art. Maybe you could talk to us about what was going on. What was it, 500? About 500 would be when the medieval.
Yeah. There was a great interest in capturing what were called saints, St. Matthew or St. Jerome or some other individual. It was very 2D, very flat. You'd have the individual with almost no resemblance of a three-dimensional, nature to
highly
their body.
Stylized.
Very stylized, very iconographic. And in a lot of ways, this is where you see notions of veneration, where there's some would say worship of the saints. Some would say that the saint was being used as a vehicle to speak to God, rather than us being able to speak directly to God through the Holy Spirit. So we see some problems, but that through veneration of the saints, we would have access to the Lord. We know that there's a lot of issues with that biblically, but that was kind of where we were at during that period of time. And so there's this, very flat, kind of like a Stoic figure, gold backgrounds quite a bit, which would be a referral or a reference to deity or the celestial. And so during this time, there was a big rejection of anything that was naturalistic. So everything was, heavenly, everything was celestial and beyond human. Right. But then over time, you shift over into, and this is kind of a big jump, but Gothic or even Renaissance. And
early Renaissance.
And Renaissance means rebirth.
Right.
And so what that would be, it would be a rebirth of the Roman Greco period of, 1,000 years earlier.
Yeah, going back to what they saw as the classics.
This was the end all be all, the creme de la creme. It was what good art was.
Right.
And so there was a rebirth in the Renaissance. And this is where on the surface we start to see images of Christ on the cross, and we see a lot of Christian references, and it's easy to be like, wow, okay, well, this is a very Christian time, but in reality, Renaissance had a lot to do with naturalism and syncretism.
Yeah.
There was a blending of mythology with Christian themes. Humanism is really growing during Renaissance. And so what you find is you have this notion of Christianity, but this conflation or this blending of humanistic thought. And so there's a lot to be said there.
Yeah. Prior to medieval times, if we're talking about Roman and Greek time, there was a great desire for strong human representation. So they would depict the natural world with great care and intention. And that actually the move into more of a stylized, flatter aesthetic was not because people didn't know how to make art.
Right.
Which is, I think, the viewer's sometimes presumption is, well, they didn't know how to make depictions. We've evolved in our ability.
We've progressed. We're so much better.
It's a false perspective.
It's a false narrative.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so the reason they were doing that is because they were deifying the figures that they were portraying in those early medieval
they weren't human
depictions. Right.
Which is one of the big issues with Christ, even just historically. He was definitely divine, but he wasn't human.
Right.
And so there was definitely issues with that in church history.
Yeah. There's theological
followed.
implications in the aesthetic itself.
And so people were very, very conceptual before the Renaissance. And so things were not, it wasn't an issue of like, well, we just don't know how to paint people.
Right.
It was more that things were gearing more towards a conceptual bent. But then with the Renaissance, just like everything is a teeter-totter, all of a sudden there was more of a need to find an observational position. And so, but with that, as much as we might have wanted to say like, oh, well, now this is like Christianity, like through the roof.
Yeah.
There was a lot of give and take. There was a lot of things that were being put into that, a lot of superstition, and a lot of mythology that was, just interwoven, which became a reflection of, if you want to call it, Christian thought of the day. Definitely Catholic thought.
Sure.
Where superstition was definitely in the forefront.
Yeah. So what we see from about 500 to 1500 is a constant melding of Christianity and paganism that had preceded Christianity in Rome. This melding together becomes Catholic superstition, and there's an aesthetic that is almost purely Catholic. Why is it that Catholics dominated art through the medieval and Renaissance time frame? Why is it that their theological voice is coming through? And then how did that manifest itself? So when we talk about art, where was the art at? Who owned art? There wasn't really an art market per se, but there was art being produced with intention.
You know, history now doesn't want to talk about the Dark Ages, right? We want to use different terms.
Sure.
But from a Christian perspective, one of the things that you see is that during this time, the Bible was not being made available in a large degree. And so rather than people having access to the scriptures, people were being, either forced or compelled to listen to church dogma, which became obviously the Catholic Church. And so in a lot of ways, the Catholic Church began to rule in a very political way, not to go into the weeds in this, but a very kingdom of heaven context, which would be physical in nature, which is where we have the Crusades and the Inquisition, which it's not Christian. It has nothing to do with Christianity. It has everything to do with ruling on this earth and making nation states that would be, quote, Christian in nature. So I don't know if that's an answer or not, but when we shift out of Renaissance, which is a gradual shift, we enter the Baroque. And one of the things about the Baroque is that, it was happening during the Reformation. And the Baroque was very didactic. It was very theatrical. It was very gruesome and intense. Michelangelo, Caravaggio were artists during this time, and very extreme color, extreme what would be
high
called
contrast,
tenebrism, which would be this extreme chiaroscuro, which would be this sharp value contrast that you're speaking of. And so, but the Baroque time period, great story, cool, whatever. But the Baroque is really about the Counter-Reformation, where the Catholic Church was saying, wait a second, where are you guys going? And so they were using these extreme, propaganda, really, to get people to come back, to scare people back, to intimidate people back, or to just
play on their emotions.
Absolutely, to wow people back, And so the Catholic Church was using their resources to create a movement, and by all means, it was beautiful. It's a really engaging time in art history, but it absolutely has a context. It's not just like, well, let's make things really contrasted now. Let's make things really sharp and bold. They were trying to be very forceful, whereas Renaissance was idealistic. It was naturalistic. It was humanistic. It was
art for the people.
And it was humanist. It was humanism, but let's connect it with Christianity. And so it was very pleasing, very idealistic. Figures were perfect. With the Baroque, figures are, they're intense. It's very strong. And it's intimidating at times.
And you use the word propaganda, and I think it's important for us to know is that art has, at almost all stages and in varying degrees, been a way of promoting ideas. It's a form of communication. And especially in the medieval time periods and moments in Renaissance art making, what you have is a very strong movement to convince the people, the masses, that the Catholic Church is the most sacred, and that if you want access to God, this is actually where you'll find it. And the imagery was intended to provoke inside in people's hearts a desire to get closer to the church and to trust the dogmatism of the day.
Well, and not trying to pick a fight right now, but salvation is found in the church. That's the perspective. That's the doctrine. And if you were to leave the church, then you are putting yourself in a position of damnation. Well, that's a scary thing. And so why would I want to do that? For a hunch that maybe the church is a little bit messed up. Maybe the church is messed up, but that's the way to salvation.
Sure, right. So people were willing to look past that stuff.
Well, yeah.
And indulgences, and we could talk about the economy behind this, but indulgences paved the way for greater and greater art, greater and greater architecture, particularly you mentioned the Gothic time period, moving into the Baroque time period. It's just very flamboyant, very loud, very, again, it's a way of promoting the power, the authority, and the divine nature of, quote unquote, the Catholic Church.
But there was no authority to stand behind besides the dogma, and so what was really superstition.
Exactly.
And that's how we get to Rococo, which is a huge departure. We're talking about now because the church has become, I say the church, I mean the Catholic Church has become so superstitious in nature, and propagandistic, extreme in some ways, but not biblically extreme. Not like where we would go,
Right.
hey, let's stand for something.
Not like a different kind of radical.
Yeah, right. The world finally goes, no thanks.
Yeah.
Scientific method comes about, empirical evidence. If I can't taste it, touch it, smell it, feel it, throw it, whatever, I don't care.
Right.
The age of enlightenment comes about. And at this point, with all of these things, coming about, and Rococo would be a French movement, but what happens is people say, you know what, I think we're done. And so we go from Renaissance, which would be this idealistic, naturalistic, religious humanism.
Right.
We then go into this very strong didactic kind of nature of Baroque, and now we're in Rococo, which is, man, if Baroque was trying to tell you something like, I'm going to teach you a lesson,
Right.
Rococo was like, man, just stick around. Let's have some fun.
Yeah, it's secularism's response to the Baroque, and it's even
Absolutely.
louder and more flamboyant. It kind of ups the ante.
In every way.
Yeah.
The flesh is fleshier, and the skin tones are pinker, and everything is just. I mean,
sure.
it's out there. It's hedonism, and so everything becomes very sensual. And the reason why is because if we have removed God, right, and we're thinking about, we're getting close to that kind of Nietzsche kind of conversation.
Yes.
If we have killed God, if we've removed God, then I can kind of do whatever I want. And so you see that. You see in Baroque, there's this kind of fearful notion, whereas but it's through superstition. And so it doesn't work.
Right.
Surprise, surprise, it doesn't work. It's not based
It's
upon.
not actual Christianity. It's not. There's nothing enticing.
There's nothing to hold on to.
Yeah.
It's just fear. It's fear tactics. And so what happens is people get tired of that, and they turn to the world, and it kind of makes sense. And so we get Rococo, which is, man, fun time.
Right.
It's
And
play.
so to frame, Rococo is really at the cusp of enlightenment. And what's happening is French philosophers are dominating the scene. America gets established. The Enlightenment thought is infused with this idea of pioneering the new world, democracy, establishing a republic. There's all these wonderful new philosophical ideas that are coming out of that time frame. And then this thing called Romanticism takes place, which is transcendental in nature. It's very naturalistic, and there's this kind of turning back. People get tired of the Rococo a little bit. It's like you get worn out. Partying gets tired.
Yeah, you can't keep it up.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's this desire to
work,
get
actually.
back to seeing the earth and seeing the world and understanding our place in the world. Maybe you can describe Romanticism for us.
Well, it's very emotional, but it's emotional in a different way. Whereas Rococo was emotional in a sensual way, Romanticism was emotional in a longing way.
Yeah.
And it was a longing back for nature, or back for relationship,
Right.
or and even in a weird way, you can see some connections to neoclassicism, which is around the same time, to a better day.
Yeah.
To-
There's
to
more
a-
stability. And,
Yeah.
and in fact, just the way Romans chapter 1 tells us that nature itself reveals the personage of God. And I think in some ways, Romanticism was a step that direction. It was like, we want to acknowledge there's something that's bigger than us. Yeah, we're not the end all be all. We're actually beginning to realize that there's something bigger, there's something grander, there's something to be explored. There's discovery on the horizon that we have not as humanity,
without going to the degree.
without going far enough.
Yeah, and that's where, honestly, when you think of the Transcendentalists, that's where we get new thought. I mean, that's where new thought comes about, and that's where we start having some of these new religions, which Eastern religion had this construct for a long time.
Yeah.
That's now, with whether it's trade or whether it's just the world's getting smaller, we're starting to see those things start to enter into the Western world and America. Interesting, though.
And all of it aesthetically is still very, very naturalistic, very realistic.
Observational,
painting.
very observational.
We would all look at it and say, well, that's exceptionally detailed. The use of color, the use of the understanding of space and environment and perspective, and all these things would be very
We would
impressive.
call it good art.
Yeah, yeah.
That's because, and I always say this in my classes where I teach at school. there's a reason for it. For 500 years, that's all we've ever seen, from Renaissance to now. That we've been conditioned to appreciate representational art. And so to a certain degree, that's kind of what we've always viewed as good, as strong, as right.
Yeah.
And yet what we find is that begins to shift.
Yes. And so let's talk about that shift. So
hello, my name is Brian Clark, and I'm a church planter in the great city of London, but I'm also an instructor at the Living Faith Bible Institute. And I just want to take a minute just to encourage you. In my own life, apart from being discipled, probably the thing that changed the trajectory of my life the most was when I learned how to study the Bible for myself. To really be able to get into the words and be able to study, it absolutely changed my life. On our website, lfbi.org, we offer all kinds of resources. We offer survey courses for large chunks of the Bible, but we also offer courses on individual books, the Pauline epistles, as well as books from the Old Testament. And you can do it all online. You can do it at your own pace, at your own convenience. And so it's right there, ready and available for you to be able to encourage you and equip you in your faith at lfbi.org.
in the mid 1800s, the invention of the camera. It was first, the camera obscura, which was a process of photography, but then the daguerreotype was invented and then mass produced. And so by the 1850s, there was a proliferation of easy access cameras. You order them through the whatever it was, Montgomery Ward catalog, and it'd be shipped to your house in a crate. And people began to get cameras, which changed the perspective on art. Explain to us that shift in art making that came after the invention of the camera.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, if I were the artist and I was wanting to paint your family and you were going to pay me a certain amount, I was now out of a job.
Right.
Because you, who were paying for that resource, were now realizing, like, wait a second, I can have this magical thing called a camera. It can capture me and my family in. And it wasn't moments like we understand today, but it was a very short amount of time to where so all of a sudden the artist was out of a job in some ways, and so the artist and the art world had to kind of recreate itself. Picasso would be one of the first who would kind of understand that. He would say, we can see what the camera has done. Now we realize what art is not.
Right.
Like art can be all of these other things. And so what we find, and I don't know if I'm explaining this very well, but with the invention of the camera, the need for the artist had to take a shift, and so artwork became less focused on representation and it started becoming more focused on concept.
Yeah. And with that, you think I think that there was still a semblance of the artist as artisanal. In other words, a craft maker. And I think all of that dies when we enter this new era where the artisan becomes the artist. Autonomy, freedom, liberty to make, a higher focus on creativity versus maybe cultural or societal pressure to make a particular thing.
And the way we talk about it right now, we're making it seem like it was a very easy shift.
No,
people said that Picasso was committing career suicide.
Right.
Anyone who studies Picasso knows that when he was 15, if you look at First Communion, if you want to look that up, I mean, at 15 years old, he's painting something that many of us could never even touch. Right. He was gifted, and so all of a sudden he starts painting things and kind of crude shapes and forms, which is the invention of cubism with he and Baroque.
Color distortions.
Well, there's a fragmentation, but there's a reason for the fragmentation. And at first, the world is going like, what are you doing? But what he's recognizing, and what a lot of other artists are recognizing, which would be in the mid-1800s, which would be realism, impressionism, even post-impressionism, then leading up to cubism, is that what the artist or the artisan was now shifting. There was a new opportunity. Not that it was a death knell. It was an opportunity for art to become something new. Yeah. Now that was not accepted. I mean, impressionism was a word that was given by its critics. Yeah. It wasn't like that's a cool thing.
And they were forced out of the mainstream artistic scene.
The academy, which would be the French academy. They were looked like it was ridiculous.
It was like the artist certification of of Europe. Really.
Well, the guilds, were still huge back then, and that's not something that we wouldn't recognize now. But yeah, so Impressionism, even another art movement called Fauvism, that means wild beast in French.
Right.
The critics called them wild beast, and so there was definitely not an acceptance of this new type of art, but throughout history now, the canon of art history recently would suggest that, man, if a camera can take the picture of the individual, then what's the point of the artist?
Yeah.
And so art then shifted.
Right. So let's fast forward. Obviously, we're not doing any of this justice, but it's good for the listeners to kind of catch an overall view. Take us up to World War I. You've already mentioned some artists that kind of overlap World War I, but there's particular things that are happening that go even beyond art into performance, into the surreal and absurd. And so when we get into World War I, there's something that's almost even outside of what Van Gogh or Picasso would
Matisse
even
or
recognize.
Picasso
Like it just goes beyond even
or-
anything they would have expected happening. Explain Dadaist and all that stuff.
Well, okay, so Picasso is important though, because
Absolutely.
and because of Cubism and the fragmentation of the self, and I think sometimes, and maybe this is getting too much into the weeds of art history, but I think it is healthy for people, especially Christians, to understand how art history has a way of touching on
Yes.
where history is heading, and I think that's where we're trying to go with this. Is that he didn't start making blocky figures because it was like, oh, shucks, I don't know what I'm doing anymore.
Right.
We already know that he was able of making great paintings. When he started painting that way, I mean, think about World War I. Think about the whole world is falling apart.
Yeah.
I mean, it's breaking down. Everything that we understood with agriculture and that way of thinking has now been shifted with the Industrial Revolution, and now with industrialism, and no longer are dads going to the farm with the family.
Yeah.
Dads are going to the assembly line. So there's
Right.
there's a breakdown of the family. There's a breakdown of the self. With the assembly line, I'm not making the whole product. I might be focused on.
You're a cog in the wheel.
I might put the light on.
Right.
And so there's this fragmentation of the self. And so artists are starting to think about those things rather than just observational painting. They're starting to make a commentary on this.
Yeah. It's a
Well,
reflection of the state of being.
It is a reflection, and art is always a reflection of man's ideas. That is absolutely something that is important to understand. I speak about that in Speech and Reasoning.
Yeah.
Is that art is a reflection of man's ideas, whether you like it or not.
Right.
Whether it makes you uncomfortable, maybe it feels creepy. It is a reflection of our times, and that is something that as Christians we better get our head around. And so you have Cubism, but you also have something that's called Dadaism, or Dada and Surrealism. And man, this is where things start to get like goofy. I mean, like out there performances where guys are just going like blah 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 blah, just weird, kind of like not making any sense.
Right.
And people are going to these bars and clubs and these places to watch these performances, and it's nonsense.
Yeah.
And the world knew it was nonsense. Even the artisans that were a part of this,
It was the point.
that was the point.
Yeah.
Is like, well, if the world is going crazy, let's just be a demonstration. Let's be a reflecting pull of the world. And so with Dadaism, you have these performances, which never really, you didn't see a lot of that. People were using strange costumes and odd behavior. And so, Dadaism was absolutely this reflection. It was, hey, if the world is falling apart, let's be a mirror.
Right. And that's only compounded when we get to World War II, and really what we would maybe describe as the destruction of painting, or how we understand painting in general. Maybe you can talk through the influence of World War II on men like de Kooning and Pollock, and what was to come at the middle of the last century.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a hard thing to maybe explain on a surface level, but all of a sudden artists are no longer painting people. They're no longer painting landscapes and still lifes. And art is coming to the end of itself. And to where you have like Ad Reinhardt in Kansas City, you can go to the Nelson, you can see a painting that is just a bunch of black squares.
Yeah.
You can see Pollock, who has just a bunch of splattered paint. You see the absence of the self. The self is gone. There's no figure. There's no tree. There's no house. There's no chimney. There's no mountain. There's none of these things.
There's not even an abstract representation of those
There's
things.
not even a representation of something.
Right.
Now the soul is gone.
It's the void.
It's a nihilism.
Yeah.
We've entered into, and this is where.
Hi, my name is Chris Best. I'm an instructor in the Living Faith Bible Institute. I teach Missions 3, servant leadership, and then I oversee some of the other aspects of LFBI. And I just want to take a minute to invite you to consider being a part of the Living Faith Bible Institute. This school is set up for you. Okay, we don't have a school for our sake. It's for people who are considering God's call on your life. Might I be a church planter? Might I be a missionary? Might I be a pastor or a leader in the church? Well, that's a good question. And then how do I get trained for something like that? And I just want to tell you that I know there is a barrier of entry into serving the Lord with your life. And some of that is learning the Bible for yourself. That is what the Bible Institute is for. Let me give you an example. I teach Missions 3. In Missions 3, we talk about church planting, the philosophy of it, why we do it, but also how to plant churches. It is very equipping for someone who feels like maybe they have a calling on their life to do that. I invite you to consider the calling that God has on your life and then your pathway to being equipped. LFBI is set up for people who are trying to do just that. So more information, visit lfbi.org. We'd love to see you there.
This is where the world has taken us. Again, if art is a reflection, and we're getting to Pollock, and well, that's just crazy. He's just splattering paints.
Yeah,
that's
anybody could do that. Like the real world could do that.
And so and I get it. You know, and the art world didn't do any favors when it like, you know,
right,
went down this path. But let's be honest, this is the reflection of where the world is going. And so when you have people that are painting black squares, and when you have people who are you know, splattering paint, it's because there's this, you know, end of self.
Yeah.
There's this you know, the soul, right? It's this vanquishing of the self. So when you think about Pollock, or when you think about de Kooning, or, you know, Reinhardt, or all these figures, it shouldn't be a surprise that this is where we find ourselves.
Right.
Not only they, but our whole world has been this. We've been on a collision course to where, you know, we're ending with this nihilistic thought, and not a surprise, but many of those artists committed suicide, you know, and many of the philosophers of that time, even French philosophers of the 60s and 70s, saw that the end was not what they hoped.
Right.
So anyway, so that's like the 50s and leading into the 60s, and that kind of brings us into the, you know, sexual revolution, and art was definitely on board for that, and leading the way. And when we say art, I think it's important that we also speak of media. You know, not only do we think of paintings or things like that, but all of media. And we have the introduction of the TV. Yeah. We have the proliferation of magazines. We have the ability for imagery to be present in our lives in a manner that was just not available.
Right. Before World War II.
Before, maybe in between that, you have newspapers and magazines and all of this availability of imagery. And sure enough, because man is sensual in nature, and you know, we desired that. It found its way into, you know, popular culture. In the 1960s, you have pop art, which basically means popular, and so it was a refusal to focus on the Napoleons or the Jesuses, right? Everything that was seemed holy or you know, high.
Right.
We're gonna make paintings and prints of SpaghettiOs.
Yeah, it was a way of bringing back the icon into imagery, a figure or a subject, but keeping it in the absurd versus the significance of a human figure that has obviously that soulishness that's still absent.
But in some ways, instead of focusing on Christ, we focus on Marilyn Monroe, you know, Joe DiMaggio. And so there is, even though through the 50s we go through this tortured artist self where there's this nihilistic view of the self. Now when the self comes back in the 60s, and again, it's always a teeter-totter, it's a celebration of like JFK. It's a celebration of a baseball player, a model. And so with popular culture and pop art, we see that there's a celebration of me. Not of kings and queens and of of Christ,
Right.
of anything that would be worthy of celebration. Now it's a celebration of self.
Sure.
Even if it's vacuous, even if it's empty, even if we are just a bunch of SpaghettiOs.
It was actually honest, though.
Well, yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah. It's where
Yeah.
we were. It's where we are. You know.
Yep.
We're still
Bright colors, shiny,
Yep.
plastic, fancy.
Yeah. So talk to us about how that time frame moves us into today, what we refer to as postmodernism. And obviously, again, we're leaving out so many small, minor, fractured movements that here and there. We don't have time to get into that. But how do we move from the 60s and the 70s up in today from the sexual revolution and the challenging of the norms, visual norms, aesthetic norms, societal norms, and we move into what we understand to be postmodernism?
Well, people talk about modernism. People talk about postmodernism. People want to talk about postmodernism at times. And there's never really and now the door is closed, right? There's always this kind of weird, slow shift from modernism to postmodernism. And one could say that modernism started back in the 1850s, 1830s. One could even argue that postmodernism started in the 1910s with Marcel Duchamp's,
the Dadaists,
Urinal,
those guys,
this
yeah.
piece called Fountain, with Dada, yeah. But what we do find is that whereas modernism was focused on this, high authority and this avant-garde, and the arts were different than the rest of the world. Let's separate ourselves from the world. It was very elite.
It's academic.
Yes, intellectual. They separated themselves from the world, and so that was my point earlier. Is when the world all of a sudden says, "You guys aren't making sense." Well, that's because the arts separated themselves completely from the world, and then when they came back, like, we're here. The world is going, well, this doesn't make any sense, right?
Right.
So anyway, modernism is this like high-reaching tower of academia and intellect. Postmodernism is the exact opposite. Now, they're both secular, completely secular in their content. But postmodernism is like this sprawling suburb of thought, and it's very collective, which obviously we see today. But we need to know, and I think this is healthy for us, that postmodernism in its like, if we want to call it a birth, that's like 1960s. I mean, collectivism, collaboration, this refusal of absolutes, where absolutes are negotiable.
Yeah.
You have an absolute?
Relativism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly. We have relativism, we have pluralism, and sometimes people use those words
There's overlap.
interchangeably
There's
with
overlap.
postmodernism. But we have this collective. And so now, rather than looking for truth or an absolute, what's more important is, do we agree? And so I'm more concerned with just, can we all have a consensus? So consensus is more important than truth. And you find that, and it sounds like we're having like a philosophical conversation right now. This is the art world.
Yeah.
The art world is less interested in, honestly, even making art. Now it's more interested in speaking art. It's interested in artist as social agent, artist as activist.
Right.
And so now the big movers and shakers that we see even today, who would even call themselves artists, spend more time working through social issues, and that's what they're more known for. Well, that didn't happen by accident. It wasn't like, well, shucks, so and so just wanted to be, a social agent instead. No, this has been the angle. It's why you see artists now that are DJs and architects and chefs. Your identity is fluid, which, shocker, now we're no longer speaking about the things that we do. Not only am I an architect, but I'm also an artist and a DJ and a chef, right? That used to be the norm in the sense that my activity was fluid. Well, now we've continued with that thought to where we've actually referred to now my being is fluid. Yeah. I now look at myself from outside myself, which surprisingly we have people that are dealing with, dysphoria, or where they feel that they can't even understand who they are. Yeah. Well, we've taught them to look at the world like that, to where you don't know who you are. I recognize myself as they, as plural, or as something beyond me. And so the fluidity of our occupation has now drawn to the fluidity of our identity.
Yeah. So okay. so we're at this moment where I think it's important for us to be able to recap, because you covered 1,500 years of history in like 20 minutes or so, but it was good. It gave us some insight. If there's a string, if there's something that ties all of this together, could you summarize art, the history of art, in a way that helps us to better understand, for lack of a better terms, what Greg Axe refers to as a chess match between Christ and Satan, and secularism and Christian faith? Can you, because like we said earlier in the introduction, there is clearly a fear. There's clearly Christianity has had a tenuous relationship with the arts, sometimes completely removed, sometimes completely sucked in. And if you could summarize for us all of that time frame in terms of that chess match or that battle for truth, how would you put that? How would you explain that to us?
Well, I think if we as Christians recognize that art is a language, that it's a way that the world has been trying to communicate. Mm-hmm. And I even say this when I'm teaching art. I say that the reason why you make art is because you can't say it. And that might sound super hippy-dippy, but I think it's actually important that mm-hmm. sometimes, I can't put it in words, but maybe I'm going to paint it, or maybe I'm going to write it in poetry down, or maybe mm-hmm. I'm going to do something else. And the world is looking with its music, with its media, with its commercials, with every way. It's trying to communicate.
Yeah.
We might not like it. We might not like what we hear. Mm-hmm. But if we as Christians realize that when the world speaks through their art, through the movies, I mean, think about all the Marvel movies that are out now, and all the supernatural kind of tendencies and
it's a religion,
mysticism,
it's
and
a religion,
Satanism that's present in these movies. Oh, that was just Stan Lee.
Yeah.
It was just some guy who was a comic book writer.
Yeah.
No, this is the world trying to respond to what they're seeing.
Right.
And the world is growing increasingly spiritual. In fact, that's one of the things we didn't talk about, but that's transmodernism. That's mm-hmm. probably where we're heading. Some people call it postmodernism, whereas modernism and postmodernism were very secular in nature. We see a new movement. Mm-hmm. It's still a modernistic movement. It's based upon sustainability. It's based upon nature. And all these things, but it's really based upon spirituality. Mm-hmm. Not the spirituality that we grew up with, but one of neo-pagan thought, new New Age mysticism.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of it. Charged crystals.
Sure.
All these types of things mm-hmm. that are happening. Wicca is becoming more and more present.
Yeah.
Mainstream, if you will. So anyway, the world is trying to speak. It's trying to say something.
Yeah, and we can either stop up our ears,
right,
or we can engage it at a level that's appropriate, which is hard for us to navigate sometimes because we do get afraid. It's hard to understand. So because it's hard to understand, we remove ourselves completely, and now we've lost our ability to engage with the lost.
Yeah.
Right. So how do we get that? How do we get to a place where we're effective ministers, where we're separate from the world, but we also live in the world?
As you're talking, the only thing I can think about is how many of our friends use Facebook as this like punching bag for mm-hmm. everything they don't like, mm-hmm. Or Instagram or whatever it is. And I just kind of want to say, put social media down. We have to begin trying to engage with the people that we say we love.
Yeah.
We have to begin engaging with people that we may disagree with.
Yeah.
But it's like, why are we here? Aren't we ambassadors? Weren't we called to reach the world for the gospel? And so maybe I need to stop making fun of, LGBTQ plus and all that. Maybe I need to stop making fun of, this and that. Mm-hmm. Maybe I need to stop making fun of what I don't understand. And I'm not saying that, maybe you just need to understand everything. Well, that would take me forever. I'm not talking about,
you can't be an expert.
Exactly.
Right.
We need to get our head in the book. But as we choose to love Christ, and as we choose to love the body of Christ and the world, I think that changes our heart.
Yeah.
And so then I have a heart for the people that aren't like me. And so then I grieve when I see how the world is representing themselves, or even trying to represent Christianity. I mm-hmm. grieve for it. But I want to reach that people, not...
Yeah, so your inclination is no longer hatred, fear-mongering. It's to engage. And so like it's almost like there should be a polarity as strangers.
We're different.
And pilgrims.
We're peculiar.
Different. There should be a polarity of ideology. There should be a polarity of faith. But the problem is that because of that, we use that as a justification to have polarity of proximity. Like we're no longer close to the lost. We've separated ourselves. We don't even know how to engage them. And because they seem otherworldly, we decide to treat them as otherworldly, which I don't know if that's what Paul would have done.
No, he didn't. He consistently was reaching out. I mean, how many places did he go? Can you imagine all the places that he went that he had no idea what Corinth was like. He had no idea what Ephesus was like. And he walks into these places. He could have easily thought, well, this place is crazy.
Yeah.
I'm getting out of here. They can all die.
Yeah, Athens is the great example.
Oh my goodness.
Right? So it was his first time in Athens. He goes by himself. He's not with the other disciples.
He was probably shell-shocked.
Yeah.
Yes.
And yet, what was his response?
Yeah.
He was grieved.
Yep.
He was grieved for the city. And I think we've lost a semblance of that because we're afraid of what we see in arts and media and culture. We're afraid.
Well, and this is probably not the right direction, but we also get behind our politics. And we become more political than spiritual. And I'm probably going to upset some people with this, but I refuse to hide behind some type of political agenda. I'm not going to allow that to get in the way of me being able to communicate to someone who may completely disagree with me in so many levels.
Right.
But I'm going to let that be the thing that deters.
Yeah.
Not some nationalistic pride or some type of other thing. I'm not going to let those things get in the way.
Right. Let the gospel divide.
My goodness. Why would you let anything else?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
That's super good. But I do want you to maybe continue to give us clarity in terms of how do we, as Christians, how are we consumers of arts and media? How can we be consumers in this world, but yet be moderate in our approach? And obviously, there's a lot of nuance in that. There's got to be conviction. The Spirit has to be involved. We understand that we have liberty, right? All things are lawful. Not everything's expedient. But can you walk us through what it looks like to be a Christian that lives in this world and is yet separate?
Well, I mean, I think of even this show right now. We're using media, or other. You guys have shows at Midtown and in the basement, and you allow different, artists to display, how they're, they're reflecting what they're thinking about with the Lord. And I think there's awesome opportunities for us to not disengage, but to engage with the arts, to speak to people in ways to where our testimony will be able to bear witness with someone. Because that is really what the arts can be. They can be a testimony.
Yeah.
And maybe a person's not convicted of their sin. And so maybe they're not going to allow you to go to Romans Road.
Right.
But maybe you can use the arts. Maybe you can use music. Maybe you can use your own testimony to engage with the lost.
To create dialogue. They're speaking.
Yeah. And
how do we speak back on common ground?
Well, let's just run away.
Right.
And so I think that there are opportunities. You and I will both probably agree with this. We're both artists. We were art teachers, and the longer I'm here and the more I follow Christ, I'm just not as interested in the arts. It doesn't really hold my sway.
Yeah.
I love the arts. I enjoy it. I'm interested in it, but man, that stuff. So when you say like being a consumer of the arts, it doesn't do as much for me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, man, I want to still be able to engage with the lost. And I opened to this earlier, but 1 Corinthians 7. 1 Corinthians 7 speaking about marriage and having a wife and not having a wife. But I love what verse 31 says, and it says, "And they that use this world as not abusing it, for the fashion of this world passeth away." If we have that focus, that the arts, they're humanistic in nature. It's going to pass away. It's like grass that just burns up.
Right.
But if we can realize that this world that God has given us, could we use it?
Right.
Could we use it for His glory? Not to abuse it, not to consume it upon my lust, but can I use the arts? Can I use it? Well, yeah, I think so. And for those who maybe aren't interested in the arts in that manner, well, maybe you can still find ways to engage.
Yeah. And again, if arts are speaking, it's culture, it's a social dialogue, it's philosophy. It's the idea that it's important for us, if we're going to have a worldview that we actually understand, it's important for us to understand the counter view. Like we can't fully even exhaust what we actually believe ourselves, and until we know what the antithetical view is. And so when we engage with the lost world at some level, and even not as a consumer, just as a viewer, an observer, I think it helps us better understand who we are as believers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that's difficult.
No.
I think it requires us to, when we read things, when we see things, when we hear about a music video that seems so perverse and disturbing, it doesn't mean you have to watch it, right? But, wow, I wonder why they wanted to do that.
Yeah.
To where we have a heart to where we want to engage with the lost instead of let's isolate completely.
Yeah.
Let's completely isolate. Well, we are becoming the same Christians, if we want to call it that started making monasteries. Mm-hmm. Why did they make monasteries? Because they wanted to be holy. As if holiness comes from separating yourself.
Right.
So I'm going to be holy because I'm going to isolate myself from the world. The world is bad.
Right.
The world is so bad. We all know that.
Yeah.
So let's isolate. Mm-hmm. That's how we can stay pure. We know that that's not biblical.
What would happen if someone who clearly comes from a different ideological background, a lost person, comes into your service? Are you engaging them? Mm-hmm. Or are you so separate? Is it so monastic in nature that you don't even know how to speak love?
This place is not for you.
Right. This is not
now
for you.
Now we can meet somewhere else, but this place isn't for you.
Right.
Yeah. That'd be problematic.
Which is, it's a devastating thought, because then the church is no longer the hospital that it needs to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think some people might listen to this and think, well, this doesn't really have anything to do with me. But I think it does require us to open our eyes to see that the arts around us they're a reflecting pool of the world around you. And the more you can realize that, you don't have to be some amazing person with the arts and you know everything about the arts, but just the more we can open our eyes, I think it'll be helpful.
Man. Well, Dan, thanks for hanging out with me and having this conversation. And we want to encourage people to take the speech and reasoning class, because it's a step towards better understanding the lostness of our world and these secular ideas. So thanks for hanging out, dude.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And we want to thank you as well, the listener, for hanging out with us for another episode of the Postscript. And if this conversation interested you at all and it was fascinating, consider visiting lfbi.org. Dan is one of the guest lecturers in a class we call Speech and Reasoning that we offer every other year. We offer this class. And so you need to keep an eye out for it when it pops back up into the cycle of courses. But also there's other classes akin to this, classes like Apologetics, classes like religious history and world religions, and other classes that deal with other perspectives, other lost perspectives. And it helps us as Christians to better get an understanding of who we are in light of these false or fallacious ideas. And so engage with the lost, engage with people that you don't understand, better understand them so you can be like Paul. You can be all things to all people that you might win some. Our heart has to be towards the mission, and we have to get close to lost people if we're going to reach them. And so we want to encourage you in that way. We love you. And again, we're so grateful that you're hanging out with us. If you enjoyed this episode, if you have people in your life that are fans of the arts or interested in this kind of topic, share this episode out, write a review, put it on your Facebook page. We really appreciate all that kind of stuff. But again, thanks for joining us. We love you. God bless. See you next week. Thank you for listening to the Postscript. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating and review in order to help other people find our podcast. If you value the show, please help us continue creating content by supporting Living Faith Bible Institute at lfbi.org/support.